When I was 19 years old, I was living in Central America when the Zapatista uprising happened. And I had never filmed anything before or thought of being a filmmaker. But I became involved with a movement down there, which was a movement which survived and won victories against the First World military because they said that their word was their weapon, that their word defended them against this military encirclement and caused a national uprising that defended them. And so myself and two friends from high school thought about what that would mean in the North, in the US, what a word would look like that could defend a movement like that. And video seemed to make sense, so we got a couple of credit cards and bought one of the first VX-1000s to get off the dock in LA and spent 2.5 years shooting down in Chiapas, making our first film, Zapatista. Seeing 50, 100 people sit in the dark theater and in the dark room and feel and experience that with you. I knew by the end of that tour that I was going to do this as long as I could afford to do it.
One of the amazing opportunities that came right away was that an American filmmaker, Amy Ziering, had no money and was making a film about Jacques Derrida. And she came to France and she heard there was an American student at this school who did cinematography. And of course, I hadn't shot anything. And she said, we don't have any money, can you film Jacques Derrida with us? And I was super impressed with Derrida, super intimidated by him. But it was my first time being around someone who was like a person in history. And I really wanted to show him that I was smart. So I was like constantly like chatting with him. And at one point we'd had this really fun ride in the car, and he was very hilarious and fun. And Amy, we got out of the car and we were leaving. Amy was just like, "Can you stop talking to him, please?" And so I was starting to realize that part of what I needed to do was just listen, just look. And at one point, he and Amy were in a conflict about whether she could continue to film. This process of their filming together went on over 9 years. And at one point he said, "Listen, I need to concentrate, I need to think, and you people are not allowing me to think. And if everyone can leave and Kirsten stays with the camera and does not speak, she can stay." And so I stayed with Derrida for 12 hours in his home, and I didn't speak the entire time. And I was trapped in this space with him, and I was trapped in this space with this really amazing person, and he was fascinating to watch and fascinating to film. And I still think to this day that's some of my most interesting footage, what I did during that day.
I've always been fascinated with how a cinematographer or a filmmaker achieves intimacy or I guess develops a sense of trust. And sometimes it has to happen, literally in the blink of an eye.
It's a strange and schizophrenic process because I direct and shoot at the same time and then also edit the films afterwards. And you have to become completely different people in each of those roles. As a cinematographer, you're constantly disappearing or trying to make yourself disappear, just sort of melt to the sides. And it actually, it is amazing how, if you're quiet, how quickly people are ready to accept your non-existence in a scene. For Dirty Wars, we were always, in a way, a part of the scene, and we were amplifying the emotion in a way. Because in Afghanistan, when we began, we were two young Americans, 30 in our 30s, who looked probably a lot like the Americans who'd kicked their door in and killed their family. And them sitting down and talking to us about it had a kind of a weight and an electricity to it because they knew they were addressing people who were implicated in the deaths of their family members, in some way. And talking consciously through us to an American public who was deeply implicated in what was happening to them and to their country. And so, there are moments when the presence of the camera actually elevates instead of diffusing or destroying. But mostly you're trying to just disappear. And then when you become an editor, you become completely monastic and hidden and insane, and you forget how to talk to people. And then when you're a director afterwards trying to talk about your film, you become a complete egotist who's out talking about how amazing they are and their film is the most important thing to ever happen. whatever. And so, but I think it's good to have that schizophrenia because you don't lose a part of yourself in that mix.
I really was amazed by Dirty Wars, having been in several of the places where the film was shot, and I think that there's an incredible, they made a really strong aesthetic choice from the beginning in the film, and followed it all the way through. And what I was sort of curious to talk to him about is that, you know, in both of the places, in Afghanistan and Yemen, I felt a very palpable sense of fear when I was working. And I think a lot about when I'm in really fearful situations, how much of that and how do I translate that to the audience?
So we set out trying to make a work of investigative journalism that was passionately committed to the real and the true and the factual, but that had the energy and the depth and the sort of speed of a fictional narrative, that constructed like a fictional narrative. And so that worked in the story, that on every level of the production of the film we were trying to do that. But for cinema, in terms of cinematography, it meant shooting in a style that actually is originally a documentary style, but then was reappropriated by people like Paul Greengrass and DPs like Barry Ackroyd as this sort of kinetic, handheld, fast-paced, quickly cut thing that is very kinetic and that sort of shoots you into the environment you're in. I mean, actually, let's show the clip from Somalia.
Among the most powerful in Mogadishu was Yusuf Mohammed Siad, known by everyone as Inda Ade, White Eyes. In an earlier life, Inda Ade had been America's enemy, offering protection to people on the U.S. kill list. But the warlord had since changed sides. The men fired across the rooftops, but it didn't make sense to me what we were doing here, or what the Americans were doing here.
There's such a great shot in that sequence, which is the close-up of the finger on the trigger, hesitating, and that's an amazing shot.
Thanks. It's so the first time I ever shot combat, I was so overwhelmed by the adrenaline of it, that I shot for 20 minutes and I didn't have a single shot that was held for longer than 3 seconds. Like it was totally, completely unusable. And your heart is, you're moving so fast that you forget how to count, or what counts out as 10 is actually, 2. It's just, so for a while, the only way that I could film, these moments that are intense and dangerous and fast, and where things are happening that will never be repeated, right? I mean, you can't ask the guy, oh, can you just shoot again at that building over there, like a couple times, just for the shot. It's what marksmen do. You empty your lungs before you shoot, and then pull the trigger, and then count heartbeats until you get to 10, and then reframe. It was the only way to hold. And so the challenge is always to get enough different angles and shots, and to still think about composition, and to still, as you're moving, and you need huge quantities of shots to be able to cover every different kind of position you're in. On that rooftop in Somalia, we were 100 feet from the Shabab front line, and they were shooting at us constantly, and I couldn't see it always happening, because you see Jeremy is behind that row of sandbags. To get the shot, I had to go in front of the row of sandbags to film backwards at him, and he could see, and you can see how terrified he is, because they as I was like running across the rooftop, they're bullets snapping on the wall behind, like blistering the concrete. That's
what we're talking about, like 10 years into filming, where it's even when you're barely present as a functioning human being, somehow your body remembers these tools that you need. But look at him in that sequence. He's walking backwards through that brambly alley in front of his main character, into shots being fired, and that shot is a combination of stable and unstable to the degree that you feel like you're there, but you can still watch the shot, which is a very fine
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah, you know, I love handheld shots because they breathe, but it becomes an aesthetic that is super tacky in, like, you know, where an MTV interview happens and they're constantly just reframing in a totally unmotivated way. I mean, I think if you try I try to hold it as still as possible, and the amount of breath and shake that comes into it is the amount that's there, and that always feels right to me.
Right.
When it happens like that.
Yeah.
And we're lucky, I think, actually, at the moment that we're doing this, because you know, I think a transition has happened aesthetically where the look, you know, that began with 16 mil on your shoulder and was, you know, a precursor to this kind of video look, changes the way that people perceive what's on the screen. I mean, the screen isn't a frame like a stage where people are moving through. The screen, and it's not a window on a world that pans across it. The screen now, I think, transmits presence. So instead of seeing something in the screen that you identify as, you are the camera moving, and the shakes and the moves and the existence there is a transmission of your presence as a cinematographer. It makes it. I mean, it makes us much more important.